What happens when one of America's most respected news anchors decides he's done playing nice with polished palace PR? When years of measured journalism give way to raw, unfiltered questioning that leaves a duchess visibly shaken on live TV? You're about to find out. What unfolded on Good Morning America wasn't just an interview. It was a reckoning. A public interrogation that left audiences stunned, headlines spinning, and a royal narrative dangling by a thread. If you think you've seen a tense TV moment before, you haven't seen anything like this. George Stephanopoulos sat across from Meghan Markle beneath the soft morning glow of the studio lights. Everything looked perfect until it wasn't. What was meant to be a promotional appearance took a sharp and sudden turn. George had his questions ready, but something in his tone made it clear this wouldn't be a softball session. "Meghan, thank you for joining us," he began with the same calm authority that made him a journalistic institution. "Let me start with something our viewers are genuinely curious about. You've shared your truth, your struggles, your experiences. But looking back, particularly on some of your claims about the royal family, do you ever wonder if your emotions at the time may have shaped your perception of events?" The smile on Meghan's face froze, just for a moment. A flicker of surprise crossed her eyes. This wasn't the cozy opening she expected. "I'm not sure what you're implying," she replied, her voice cool but clipped. "My truth is based on my lived experience. I've spoken carefully and intentionally." George leaned forward slightly, pen tapping softly on his notes. "Of course, but lived experience can be subjective. Emotions, trauma, mental state, they all affect memory. Don't you think it's fair to ask whether some of your more serious allegations might have been colored by how you were feeling at the time?" The studio fell deathly still. Even the background hum of the control room seemed to vanish. Meghan shifted in her seat. "George, what you're doing right now, that's the very gaslighting I experienced within the institution. You're implying that my experience of racism, of being silenced, of battling mental health struggles, is just some emotional exaggeration." "I'm not gaslighting you," George said evenly, his voice now tinged with steel. "I'm doing my job. You made accusations that shook a global institution and reverberated around the world. That demands scrutiny. So let me ask more directly. When you spoke about concerns over Archie's skin color, you left the world guessing. You didn't name names, and the entire royal family was painted with the same brush. How is that fair?" For the first time, Meghan's composure began to crack. "Are you seriously suggesting I should have named someone and destroyed their life over a private comment?" She shot back. "I was trying to be protective, to handle it with dignity." "Protective of whom?" George countered. "Because from where I sit, it looks like you protected your narrative. At the cost of the family you joined, and the country that welcomed you. You can't accuse people of racism and then refuse to provide any accountability." Now the tension was unbearable. Staff in the studio stopped what they were doing. Every eye was locked on the exchange. Meghan took a breath, visibly collecting herself. "I answered a direct question in that interview. I wasn't trying to start a war, George. I was trying to tell the truth about what I lived through. I wasn't going to lie just to shield an institution that never protected me." George let out a short, humorless laugh. "Not protected. Meghan, you were given a title, a platform, staff, security, a global spotlight. You entered one of the most privileged positions on earth. But when things didn't go your way, when you discovered royal life comes with structure and sacrifice, your response was to go nuclear on international television. Did they really fail to protect you? Or did they fail to bend to your expectations? You're oversimplifying something incredibly complex." Meghan replied, her voice rising. "You have no idea what it's like to live inside that system. To be told you can't defend yourself. To watch lies about you spread while the people closest to you say nothing." George set down his pen and stared directly into the camera, before turning back to her. Let's talk about those lies then. You've claimed you weren't prepared for royal life, that no one told you what to expect. But you dated Prince Harry for 2 years. You had the internet, books, 2 decades of documented royal protocol. Are we really to believe you walked in blind? Meghan's face flushed. Her fingers nervously fiddled with the bracelet on her wrist. Research and reality aren't the same thing, she said quietly. And in that moment, millions of viewers realized. This wasn't a conversation. It was a confrontation. And it had just begun. George, you can read every book, every article, every royal biography ever written, Meghan said, her tone clipped but firm. But until you're living it, until you are the one being photographed for how you hold a coffee cup or dissected for how you close a car door, you have no idea what that reality feels like. Fair enough. George nodded, but the look in his eyes said he wasn't backing down. Not yet. Then let's get specific, he continued. You claimed that Kate made you cry before your wedding, a moment that cast her in an unflattering light and one that the press ran with for months. But later, you admitted you had actually made her cry and that she apologized and brought you flowers. So which version are we supposed to believe? And more importantly, why let the false version hang in the air for so long before correcting the record? The silence that followed was deafening. Meghan opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. The words didn't come easily. George had hit a nerve, and the pause said everything. I'm still waiting, George said quietly, his voice heavy with the calm intensity of a man who'd made a career holding powerful people accountable. You let your sister, in law, be vilified by the press for years, Meghan, over something you knew wasn't true. That's not just misleading. That's cruel. Meghan's composure finally slipped. You don't understand what I was going through, she said, her voice cracking. The wedding, the media, the pressure to be perfect. It was all too much. When that story came out, I didn't want to fan the flames. I wanted to protect what was, at the time, a private moment between Kate and me. It wasn't about hurting anyone. But you did hurt someone, George said, relentless now. You hurt Kate. You damaged the monarchy's public image, and you undermined your own credibility. Because when you finally did tell the truth, it came out in a separate interview. Like an afterthought, it felt controlled, like you were managing the story, timing the reveal for maximum sympathy rather than maximum honesty. The camera zoomed in as Meghan's hand trembled slightly while reaching for her water glass. That's not fair, she snapped. You're framing me as manipulative when all I was doing was trying to survive. Every move I made was twisted. Every word spun into something it wasn't. I was damned no matter what I did. George leaned back, eyes still locked on hers. Let's talk about survival. Then, he said, you spoke publicly about having suicidal thoughts, about reaching out for help and being told you couldn't seek therapy because it would be bad for the institution. That's a very serious allegation. But here's what I can't quite reconcile. You had wealth. You had access. You had a husband who loved you. Why didn't you get help anyway? Why did you need the royal family's permission to care for your mental health? The Meghan's mask of diplomacy finally cracked. Because you don't understand how that world works, she said, anger rising now. You don't just go rogue. You can't just walk out and book a therapist. Every decision, every action, has to go through proper channels. You're not a person. You're a symbol, and they were more concerned about headlines than human beings. George's voice turned cold. So you're saying you chose to suffer silently rather than risk upsetting palace protocol. You put your mental health, your life, on the line because you were afraid of what? Breaking the rules. Meghan's body shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The lights felt hotter now. Her eyes darted off camera. You're oversimplifying something that was incredibly complicated, she said, her voice lowering. When you're inside that system, it consumes you. You forget you have choices. You forget how to function outside of the machine. You're told what to do, how to dress, how to act. You're told who you are. George nodded slowly, but the skepticism never left his face. And yet, he said, leaning forward just slightly, when it came to other decisions, public interviews, production deals, launching a global brand, you seem to rediscover your independence just fine. Meghan didn't respond immediately, but her silence said more than words ever could. You continued working with your patronages, George said, calm but pressing. Despite reported guidance to step back, you maintained friendships the palace allegedly disapproved of. You wore outfits that supposedly violated protocol. Clearly, you were capable of acting independently when it suited you. That's not the same, Meghan snapped, frustration flaring in her voice. Supporting charities and keeping my friends isn't the same as fighting to see a doctor. One affects a photo op. The other affects my life. But that's exactly my point, George replied, leaning in. You made independent choices on your terms. But when it came to protecting your own mental health, you claim you were powerless. It sounds like you're picking and choosing when to be the victim and when to be the independent woman. The words landed like a punch. The air seemed to thicken. Meghan's expression cycled through disbelief, anger, indignation, until it hardened into something cold and defiant. How dare you, she said softly, but with unmistakable venom. How dare you sit there and question my mental health struggles? You have no idea what it's like to feel that broken, to wake up and see no way forward, to be trapped in a system that sees you not as a human being, but a threat to manage. George didn't blink. You're right. I don't know what that feels like, but I do know what accountability looks like. And right now, I'm looking at someone who's built an entire platform on being the wounded outsider while still wielding influence, wealth, and global media power. You can't have it both ways, Meghan, she scoffed. A career out of playing the victim. I left everything. My job, my country, my privacy, my family. I gave up everything to try and make that marriage work. I tried to fit into a life that was slowly crushing me. And when I couldn't survive it anymore, I left. How is that playing the victim? George picked up his pen again, tapping it slowly against his notepad with surgical precision. You left, he said, but you didn't leave quietly. You didn't fade out with dignity or restraint. You left with interviews, a Netflix series, a book deal, a global PR campaign. You turned your exit into a rebrand, into a business. That's not retreat, that's strategy. Meghan's jaw clenched, shoulders stiffening as she struggled to hold her composure. Every camera in the studio zoomed in now, capturing the subtle tremble of her hands, the tightness in her breathing. We told our story, she said through gritted teeth. Because no one else would. Because the palace allowed lies to spread unchecked. We were being attacked. We had to defend ourselves. Set the record straight. George echoed, raising an eyebrow. Or rewrite it. Meghan's eyes narrowed. Because here's what I've noticed, he continued, tone sharpening. Your story evolves. Details shift. One interview contradicts the next. Old claims disappear, new ones emerge. That's not transparency. That's narrative control. The tension had turned electric. Even the crew had stopped moving. Meghan's hands trembled now, knuckles whitening around the glass of water she never brought to her lips. My story hasn't changed, she said, her voice low and intense. What's changed is my tolerance. My willingness to protect people who never protected me. My understanding that staying silent while they let my reputation burn was a mistake. George leaned forward like a prosecutor closing in. Then we've finally reached it. This isn't about healing. This isn't about closure. This isn't about truth. This is about revenge. You suffered and now, so must they. The accusation hit like a thunderclap. Meghan froze, her mouth parting slightly. Her voice wavered with fury. Revenge? You think I endured years of bullying, racism, suicidal thoughts for revenge? No, George said, without hesitation. I think you endured it, and then realized being the wronged underdog sells. It sells books. It sells shows. It sells interviews and sympathy. The more tragic the story, the higher the value. And you knew that. A Meghan shot to her feet, her chair screeching across the studio floor. I don't have to sit here and be publicly dismantled, she spat. You invited me here under false pretenses. You pretended this was a conversation. It was a setup from the moment I walked in. George remained seated, eyes locked on her, calm, unmoved. I invited you here for an honest exchange. Something I've noticed is always in short supply whenever your version of events is involved. The Meghan turned to leave, but something in George's tone stopped her mid-step. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, but it was commanding. Sit down, Meghan, he said, his voice low and immovable. We're not done. Her back was still turned. The power dynamic had shifted entirely. This wasn't a puff piece. This was a reckoning. Sit down. She turned slowly, caught in the silence, the gravity of the moment. I have one more question, George said, each word deliberate. And I think our viewers deserve an answer. Meghan stayed standing for a beat longer, her jaw tight, her eyes darting as if searching for a way out that wasn't there. The tension in her body was visible, shoulders high, breath shallow. Then, with clear reluctance, she eased back into her chair, but there was nothing relaxed about it. Her spine remained stiff, arms crossed, every muscle signaling resistance. George leaned forward slightly, voice calm but edged with steel. Here's what I want to understand, he said. If what you've said is true, if you were truly silenced, mistreated, and discriminated against on the scale you claim, then where's the evidence? No emails, no texts, no formal complaints, no recordings, not a single colleague, assistant, or insider willing to corroborate, on or off the record. The air in the studio went still. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. In an institution as vast and bureaucratic as the royal household, George continued, with hundreds of employees and endless protocols, how could a pattern of abuse, systemic, deliberate as you've claimed, leave no trace? No documentation? Nothing in writing? Meghan's face tightened. Her expression flickered between disbelief, panic, and realization. She had walked into a trap she hadn't seen coming. This wasn't just about challenging her story. It was about dismantling the foundation of it. That's not how this works, she said, the words stumbling out. Her voice had lost its polish. These were private moments. These things, they don't get written down. People don't log every time they're excluded or made to feel small. But they do log official requests. George countered. They keep records of mental health referrals, formal complaints, meetings with HR. You say you were denied help. Where's the file? The email, the follow-up, and the conversation about your child's skin color. No one wrote that down either. No one. Meghan's hands trembled slightly in her lap. Her voice came smaller now. You're turning this into a courtroom when it was family. Not everything happens through official channels. George's tone sharpened. Family. Meghan, you sat down on national television and accused one of the most visible institutions in the world of racism, negligence, and cruelty. That's not a private matter. That's a public indictment. And with public accusations comes a public responsibility to provide proof. The studio fell into a heavy, loaded silence. Even the hum of equipment felt distant. The energy in the room had shifted entirely. What began as a promotional sit-down had turned into something else. Something surgical. I do have proof, Meghan said faintly. I have my lived experience. I have my truth. George shook his head, almost with regret. Your lived experience isn't evidence. And your truth isn't the truth. What people have seen today is someone who's built an entire platform on being wronged, who has monetized trauma, both real and exaggerated, and in doing so, has damaged relationships, reputations, and institutions. all for a narrative that's made you incredibly visible and incredibly profitable. Meghan finally looked into the camera, her eyes glassy and imploring. "That's not fair. That's not who I am. I didn't want this. I didn't choose for any of this to happen." "But you did choose how it happened," George replied. "You chose to tell the world. You chose to frame it dramatically. You chose to profit from it. And now the world has to decide whether to keep buying what you're selling, or whether it's time to start asking the questions I've asked today." The interview closed on a haunting image. Meghan, silent, rattled, her confidence fractured, and beside her, George Stephanopoulos staring straight into the lens, with the quiet resolve of a journalist who knew exactly what he had done. He stripped away the script, exposed the performance, and demanded real answers. What began as a simple segment became a landmark moment in televised journalism, one that left millions watching, rethinking, and talking. What did you think of this stunning confrontation? Did George go too far? Or is this exactly the kind of accountability public figures should face? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. We'll be breaking down this interview frame by frame in our next video.